USCHO.com. This is the USCHO Weekend Review podcast from U.S. College Hockey Online at USCHO.com. A look at this weekend in college hockey and a review of the top news of the week.
Welcome to Weekend Review for Monday, January 25th, 2021. I'm Ed Trefzger alongside Jim Connelly. Well, Jim, every time Jerry York's Boston College Eagles win a game, Jerry York sets a new record. But this time around, it was another milestone.
They just keep coming, as they say. And this was win number 1,100 on Saturday down at UConn. Came against his former long time associate head coach, Mike Cavanaugh, who's now the head coach down in Connecticut. And listen, I don't see this stopping. I see Jerry York as a coach who is still prepared to coach games for a long time. He's putting out extremely competitive teams. I mean, this is a very good Boston College team that finds ways to win games or at least take points out of every game right now. They're doing a great job of that. Like I said, I just don't see this stopping. I see him coaching for maybe maybe the rest of his lifetime. This is not a guy who I see heading to the sidelines. He's not a horse you can put out to pasture. I've said it before, he's that racehorse that you take off the track and say that you're going to put it into stud, and next thing it's breaking barn doors because it wants to run. That's Jerry York. He wants to keep coaching. He loves it. It is his passion. It is his life. And I loved a photo that I saw on social media after the game of him and UConn women's basketball coach Gino Oriyama, who last Tuesday, I believe he passed Pat Summitt with the 1,099th win. Then Thursday he got 1,100, and then I believe that afternoon he had gotten 1,101. So 2,201 victories between two coaches in one picture was pretty amazing to capture. So I love the story of Jerry York just continuing to win. There's nothing more enjoyable for me. I think there's few things in college hockey more enjoyable than that, because I know the man. I've known him well for almost 2 decades now, and just he has that passion, and you don't see that passion often for anything. Forget about coaching, and I love what Jerry York does, and here's to number 1,200. I can't wait to see that one.
Well, a couple of years ago when he was having medical issues, eye problems, and needed some surgery, I guess, along the way, it seemed like things were kind of weighing on him a little bit. He seems like the Jerry York of 10 years ago this season. He's got kind of that drive and vitality. It's like he's turned back the clock this year.
It's interesting what COVID has done too, and we see it a lot as journalists. There's more. You'd think that there would be almost no interaction with coaches now, but there's actually more because of Zoom. And Jerry has a weekly media availability that is very well attended. His post game press conferences, all this stuff on Zoom, very well attended. So he interacts with more people, and every time I've had a chance to interact with him, a lot of pep in his step, a lot of joy. He's a very jovial man. He's got, you can tell he enjoys what he's doing, but he enjoys life too. And you're right. I feel like he has kind of hopped into the hot tub time machine and gone backwards a decade at least, if not more. I mean, it doesn't hurt that his team is winning, and it's a very good team, a very talented team with some guys that will be in the NHL in very short order. But that's that alone, just winning, I think helps. But then, being able to interact with more people, I think is something that probably helps you feel more comfortable, helps you feel like you're staying young.
Yep, indeed. Well, let's turn to some other things going on. Last week, we were talking about how Minnesota had lost 3 out of 4 games, and we're starting to wonder about the Golden Gophers. They got bumped out of the number 1 spot in the USCHO.com men's Division I ice hockey poll. They had a big sweep over the weekend, or actually Thursday, Friday. It's always the weekend, right? They had a 10-0 win and a 10-2 win over Arizona State. Let's touch on the Golden Gophers first, and then about the Sun Devils. This was probably a weekend that Bob Motzko's team needed to kind of get their juices back and feel like maybe they weren't in a slump.
Yeah, I don't know if there was going to be any team in the country that was going to go into Mariucci this weekend and not get thumped. This was a Minnesota team that was poised to take it to somebody, and unfortunately for Arizona State, they ended up being the team that went in and really got thumped. 10-0, 10-2. You don't see 20 goals allowed in a weekend, and this Minnesota offense was cranking. And you and I have talked about this, and I've mentioned it a few times, many different places this year. I think that this is an offense that has so much talent. They should be scoring more than they have been. So to see them break out, I mean, this is one of those things where you're saying, boy, have we just opened the floodgates. I live in Boston. I'm a Boston Bruins fan, and they hadn't scored an even strength goal in their first 3 games and all the way to the third period of their 4th game against Philadelphia the other night. Then they got 3 in 1 period, and one of the players said, watch out now, here we come. Well, 2 nights later, they score 6. That's what I feel like is going on here with Minnesota. They had really struggled to find the back of the net. Now they've popped 10 in back-to-back games. You don't know that that's going to keep going, but it's a great sign. You're heading in the right direction, and whoever is next on their schedule, you line them up. I think that this is a Minnesota team that can do a lot of good things here. They have great talent on the defensive side, so if their offense gets going, boy, they're dangerous.
Looking at the Sun Devils, you have to have some empathy for Coach Greg Powers' squad. So much time on the road. I think an analogy would be this. It would be sort of like the Boston Bruins in the last game of a West Coast road trip where they have to play Winnipeg, Calgary, Vancouver, and San Jose, and multiply that times 7. And that's the kind of a road trip they've had to do. No games at home, although they've added a couple exhibition games with the U.S. under-18 team, which is terrific. They'll get to have a couple of them at their home arena at Oceanside. But man, this was an uphill climb to start out. And you know, if you've traveled much at all, how wearing it is just traveling and doing normal things. Try to play hockey, try to get practices in, try to keep your energy levels up. That they are doing as well as they have is a testament to that program.
Yeah, it's really rough. And, 58 of 70 days they were on the road, got home for 12 days around Christmas time and then right back on it. This time they'll get 20 days at home. You mentioned they will have that series against the under-18, the U.S. National Team Development Program. Then they go back on the road for the final 22 days of their season. And we've talked so many times about the NCAA tournament selection at large. I think we can kind of put, out of our head that Arizona State is going to get in that large bid. They're so far off right now. I haven't looked at how many games are remaining, but I don't know that they can get back above 500. That aside, it's been a tough season, but I give them credit. And if this doesn't make this team stronger going forward, I don't know what will. They're going to get a lot of strength out of this. They're going to understand what it is like to have a good road mentality, what it's like to be road warriors. I think it was ESPN after the first road trip, which was in the 30-something days, wrote a story that kind of detailed everything that they've gone through. And, I felt like reading that I felt pain because it's so hard to be on the road for that long and away from home. But at the same time, I felt like these guys are enjoying. They're getting some sort of a college atmosphere, even though they're not in college. I don't know if that makes any sense, but when you think of all the kids, students around their country, not just student athletes, but all the students that are sitting at home, maybe in their parents' basement or their bedrooms, trying to be college students, and they're losing something. For Arizona State, I feel like they've actually gained something in this long road trip in this season where they've been away. And it's the friendship of teammates, no doubt, but it's the ability to be around people and adjust and adapt. They've done a great job with that. And, Greg Powers and his staff, who knows how the season ends up, but they've done some great things for these young men to give them the opportunity to play hockey. And you got to take your hats off to everybody.
Michigan got a road sweep, returning the favor of Notre Dame sweeping them earlier in the season at Yost. Number 8 Michigan with those pair of wins over number 16 Notre Dame. Before coming home and finding out they've got to take a couple of weeks off. First, let's talk about the hockey. One thing we talked about in the Game of the Week podcast is that Notre Dame did not want to find itself trying to play catch-up. Well, that was the situation in the Thursday game where 4 second-period goals really dug a hole for Notre Dame as Michigan went out to that big lead. A little bit different game on Friday, but, good for Mel Pearson's squad. 5-1 since returning from break on January 8th, and a difficult weekend for Jeff Jackson's Fighting Irish, who had been playing very well up to that point.
They had, and I thought that Michigan proved what a solid team this is. They found a way to win 2 very, very different types of games. Starting with Thursday, their offense came alive. Their defense looked great. Strauss-Mann was strong in net. They really took it to the Irish, had control of that game the whole way. And then Friday, you jump out to a really early 1-0 lead. It was in the first 2 minutes that they scored. And then if you had a chance to watch that first period, they dominated. I mean, it should have been 3-0 or worse after 1. And then you don't score. You let Notre Dame hang around. They tie the game in the second. They actually had a goal disallowed. They could have been in the lead if not for a goalie interference call. And then Michigan found a way in the third period to win. And, I had a chance to talk with Mel Pearson after that game. And, he said he's just proud of the way his team responded. He didn't like the lulls. He thought that there were lulls. He didn't like the fact that they couldn't bury chances in the first, and he thought there was a big lull in the second period. But thought his team really responded in the third, and that, he felt things were going well. Now, they were scheduled to have a bye weekend coming up, but he had kind of run through some things that he really wanted to work on in practice. Unfortunately, it's now going to be 2 bye weekends with all of the programs put on pause. There will be no practices to work on those things that he knew that need some work. So tough situation for Michigan. It'll be interesting to see what happens in 2 weeks if they're allowed to come back. The report is that there was the more aggressive variant of COVID-19 that we'd heard about in the UK arrived on campus in the form of a student athlete who had been over in the UK. They tested positive. So we don't know. It's all Michigan sports that are on pause right now. So we don't know 14 days from now what will happen. But this team was headed in a great direction, and we know how strong they can be. They proved it this weekend. Let's hope that, 14 or however many days it might be before they get back on the ice, that they can find a way to pick back up right where they left off.
Well, we've got a lot more college hockey to cover from a very busy weekend when USCHO Weekend Review continues.
This is the USCHO Weekend Review podcast from US College Hockey Online.
This is Weekend Review from USCHO.com. I'm Ed Trefzger alongside Jim Connelly. North Dakota had a sweep of Colorado College. They're now 5-1 since the pod closed. There was a little bit of a concern of a dip maybe from North Dakota at the end of the pod, but it seems like they are starting to really gel right now, as if they weren't already gelling. They're taking it to another level. First home game in 11 months at Engelstad Arena over the weekend.
Yeah, they for the few fans that could be in the building, they're one of the states that are allowing fans right now. They got to see their team play and play well. 2 very dominant wins of CC. They played, had some explosive moments offensively, and that's what we know this North Dakota team can do. I had some concern, I think, when they dropped that 4-1 decision to Denver. I guess it was in maybe earlier January, so a couple of weekends ago. But they picked it right back up, and here they are, 5-1 since the new year, and they're heading in the right direction. I don't know where we'll be with the number 1 team. They did not get my vote. In honesty, I gave it to Boston College, but I thought, North Dakota could have gotten my first place vote, BC, and I also threw Minnesota State in there. Those 3 teams all could have gotten my vote. I gave it to Boston College because I think they're still playing some very good hockey, but be interesting to see what the voters think when the poll comes out today.
I think you're going to see a real tight clump at the top. I agree with you that probably Boston College will stay number 1. Also, don't forget in there Minnesota State. And while we're mentioning the Mavericks, how about Dryden McKay continuing his hot pace in net? 6 shutouts and 10 starts. And, when you start thinking about Mike Richter Award winners, his name has got to be in the conversation.
No doubt. They gets the 2-0 win to start the series against Ferris State, and then allowed one goal on Sunday. That's that big one goal. My gosh, his goals against average below 1 right now. I believe was a .88 when I looked at it last night. What can you say? I mean, he's got a great defense in front of him. There's no doubt. We know that, and I think that his shutout was, I don't know, it was either in the teens or maybe it was only 11 saves he had to make. It wasn't a ton. But at the same time, he's making them. And that's 20 career shutouts that he has posted, and he's only a junior. Let's remember that. He's only played 3 seasons. He had 10 shutouts last year. He's 6th thus far this year in 10 games. If you put that, say, on pace, if they were to play 30 games, maybe they get 30 and they probably don't. But by the end, could you imagine if he had 16, 17, 18 shutouts by the end of this? You mentioned Richter Award. There's no reason that in a kind of a strange year, he can't also be considered for Hobey Baker.
Well, and I was going to mention that. You think back to the last goaltender to win the Hobey Baker, Ryan Miller in 2001. And it's been a case of, well, if you want to be a goaltender and win the Hobey Baker Award, you need to put up Ryan Miller type numbers, which really nobody has until this year. You have a few players putting up some numbers sort of in that area. When you get into that many shutouts, when you get into save percentages in the 940 range and above, then you're starting to talk Ryan Miller numbers. Now, granted, there was no Richter Award back when Ryan Miller was playing college hockey, and hard to believe he's still playing, watching him play for Anaheim. Here he is 20 years later and still looking pretty sharp. But, there's a possibility you could see a goalie in there. I at least expect to see a goalie or two among the 10 finalists. It's that kind of a year. Things are just weird. As the cliche goes, throw the record books out the window. It's definitely that type of season. Well, let's turn to something else that is a product of this weird season, and that is the small number of games Boston University has played. But BU now at 5-1, they swept Maine, and I think you will see Boston University in the top 20 in today's USCHO.com poll.
I think you're right. I mean, they could honestly be one of the highest debuting teams you ever see in a poll, to go from receiving votes and into the poll. I think I had them somewhere around 12th on my ballot. I mean, they to me are impressive right now. And it's hard to know what type of a team you had. They were the last team to get their season started. Their administration wasn't letting anything happen in the 2020 calendar year. And then as soon as we hit 2021, they've gotten 6 games played in 4 weeks. Not bad. They're no longer holding the mark for least games played. That's now Canisius and UMass Lowell. They're each tied with 4. But this is a BU team that continues to play well. They're showing themselves well. And, we just mentioned Hobey Baker. I think that you look at defenseman David Ferentz, and he's probably just, 6 games into the season, already kind of putting up Hobey Baker-like numbers. I believe he has 14 points in the 6 games. He factored in every game this weekend, including Friday's game where he, scored a goal and had 2 assists in a 3-2 overtime win. I mean, that's a guy who's in the offense. He's a real talented player, moves the puck really well, sees the ice incredibly well. And when he gets that shot off, it's dangerous. So let's kind of, put it on the back burner. It feels like we're starting a Hobey Baker conversation here, but we look at Dryden McKay, but you have to also certainly look at David Ferentz. Those are really impressive numbers. And here we are with another offensive-minded defenseman. We had Kalen McCarr, Scott Perunovich the last 2 seasons, and here we are maybe 3 years in a row where a defenseman could be the favorite for the Hobey Baker.
Yeah, defensemen, particularly with the way the game has evolved and defensemen getting more into the offense. Hobey loves goals. Hobey has been loving defensemen. Let's take a look at Bemidji State. They got a big weekend home sweep against number 5 Bowling Green, taking 3 out of 4 from the Falcons over a pair of weekends this season. That's going to hurt Bowling Green a bit in the poll, but this is terrific for Tom Serratori's Bemidji State Beavers.
Last night I was kind of doing a little bit of research, and I guess I didn't realize Bemidji State is a team that had slowly drifted out of the front of my mind. I kind of maybe put them a little bit too far on a back burner. But then as I started to look at this season, obviously you just mentioned it, 3 of their last 4 games against Bowling Green, and they've been very, the 3 of the last 4 games have been wins against Bowling Green. 4 games in a row they've played them. Solid right there. Then you look, they've played Lake State, which was a team that was surging early. They get a win and a tie in that. They tied Minnesota State. They're really one of the few blemishes, and they lost a 1-goal game to Minnesota State. The only really bad mark on their schedule was their opener, 5-0 loss way back on November 22nd to Minnesota State. And then they had COVID hit their team in at least their league. I'm not sure if it was their actual team, but there were COVID postponements, and they went a long time without a game. And I think that was what helped push them out of, at least my mind, and I think a lot of the voters' minds in the USCHO poll. But I expect them to get some recognition this weekend. They were on my ballot. They're playing some good hockey. They're not allowing a lot, which is really the most helpful thing, that their goaltending, their defense has really shut down opponents. They could use some more goals. I don't think that they have they've only once this year scored more than 4 goals in a game, and that was a 6-3 win against Michigan Tech way back on December 12th. They only scored 5 goals this weekend, but when you only allow 2 against a very good Bowling Green team, that you're going to come out with some wins. They end up with a sweep.
As we get towards the postseason, one of the arguments is going to be how many teams from a league can be in the tournament. You got to make an argument for 2 teams from the ECAC with the parity between number 14 Clarkson and number 10 Quinnipiac, a couple of 1-1 games, talking about low scoring, and then Clarkson getting a win 4-2 for the third. Each of the teams also got a shootout victory in the first 2 games. They are neck and neck. They're tied in point totals and percentage of total points in the ECAC standings. And they do have St. Lawrence and Colgate nipping at their heels. But what about these 2 teams? Could you find anybody more evenly matched?
No, and they've now played each other 6 times this year. Pretty sure on that 4 of those games maybe have gone to overtime. I mean, they're playing some really close games, a lot of 1-goal games, overtime games, shootouts. They've done it all. And I think that you're right that they both are making a strong case for the NCAA tournament, because they didn't just get some non-league games in. Both of these teams are aggressive in trying to schedule. They got some non-conference games in. So, you look at Clarkson, they're if I'm doing the math right, they are 5-3 outside of conference. Quinnipiac a little bit better, 6-2-1 out of conference. So those 2 teams are kind of making a resume for themselves. St. Lawrence, as we look at the ECAC standings, they are only 2 points behind. But when I say that, and there's a big but in there, they didn't play any out-of-conference games. So their 4-4-2 mark in the ECAC is also their overall record. So maybe they won't be able to make a case unless they go on a run. And if they do, that's probably going to be at the expense of either Clarkson or Quinnipiac, because you only have so many teams you can face. There's only 4 teams in the league this year. But it's going to be interesting. And, I think we can have the same conversation about the WCHA right now, where, we've said that Bowling Green is strong all year, that yes, they hit a little bit of a rut of late. But when you then throw in Bemidji in the way that they're playing, okay, they're only 5-4-2 overall. But they've, put some really strong weekends together. And then we know Minnesota State is a team. So there's going to be a lot of conversations. It's going to be some tough decisions, especially understanding that this is going to be more of a subjective, not as opposed to an objective way of seeding the tournament this year. So I think that we're going to get to the middle of March. Tournaments will be completed, and the NCAA tournament committee is going to have their hands full trying to figure out who gets at-large bids, because right now you've got a lot of teams in leagues that you might not think about, the ECAC, the WCHA, making great cases for themselves.
We were very high on Western Michigan after they got a sweep of St. Cloud State, but they kind of got stepped on a little bit by Minnesota Duluth, who also had come off of losing 3 in a row to St. Cloud, 5-1 and 4-1 wins. a big weekend for the Bulldogs.
You know what? I think that we talked about this with Minnesota way back at the beginning of this podcast, and I didn't care who the opponent was this weekend. I felt like that Minnesota, if they were going to get their act together, they were going to have a big weekend, and they did. You had Jackson Cates with a hat trick on Saturday, and then you had some more spread out offense on Sunday. But 5-1, 4-1 win. You've got to start turning the tide right now. If you're Duluth, everybody knows they're a good team, but their record isn't backing it up right now. To at least think of them as a top 5 team. I think that they are. When the eye test and watching them play, they're solid. They are probably one of the best teams. They just haven't had all the results at this point. So you've got to find a way to start turning that around. And I think at this point we're seeing that turn. They're still an uphill climb if they want to get to the top of the NCHC, and I'm not sure that they can get there having lost those 3 games against St. Cloud. But at 8-5-2 overall, I feel like this is a team that has a little bit more work to do if they're going to be one of the higher seeds in the NCAA tournament.
Lastly, probably no conference has been more affected by COVID postponements, at least since the start of 2021, than Atlantic Hockey. And right now, the league is working on reorganizing its schedule to try to get some balanced numbers through the rest of the year and the rest of the regular season. And so that meant a change in schedule for Mercyhurst. They had a game on Saturday, moved it up against Robert Morris, and it was a big weekend for the Lakers. They had a 3-2 overtime victory on Tuesday, and that was a close, hard-fought game. And then a crazy one on Saturday. At the end of one, Robert Morris had a 2-1 lead. Mercyhurst changed that around to go up 5-2, and Robert Morris clawed back and tied the game by the end of the second period, 5-5. A late third period goal and an empty netter solidified it for Mercyhurst, but they picked up 5 out of 6 points on the weekend.
Yeah, I'm not sure exactly what to think about Mercyhurst right now. I know that they have some solid components. Despite the number of goals that they've given up, they've got a good goaltender in Hank Johnson, and it seems like they're finding ways to score goals. And if you're scoring goals right now, I think that it's going to go a long way to give you confidence. And that's, I think, what Mercyhurst needs. They're going to, they had some postponements because of COVID, and as you mentioned, the crazy schedule. I think that they'll be one of those teams that their schedule might get loaded up here a little bit down the stretch, and they'll end up, playing some tough schedules where it could be, 3 games in 5 days, 5 games in 8 days, those types of schedules. There's a lot of teams in college hockey that are going to face that. But Mercyhurst being one of them, if you're scoring goals, that's a nice thing. You want to have those long stretches when your offense is clicking. You don't want to be in a rut and then know that you have to play, maybe 10 games over the span of 18 days. So if you're scoring the goals, and we'll talk to Rick Gawkin a little bit later in this week on our Spotlight podcast, but if you're scoring those goals, it always feels nicer to go out on the ice, no matter how tired you are, no matter how many games you might have played.
Well, it should be a very crazy next 4 weeks as schedules continue to get juggled. And, we wait each week for Hockey East schedule, and they've got to get a few games in. As you mentioned, some teams may not end up playing each other. Hopefully the games can happen. Hopefully the situation at Michigan is an anomaly. And we'll just keep our fingers crossed on that. For Jim Connelly, I'm Ed Trefzger, and we'll catch you next time.
This has been the USCHO Weekend Review Podcast, a production of U.S. College Hockey Online. Visit uscho.com/podcasts to listen or subscribe.